Welcome to the Art of the Game podcast. We are back for season 2. I'm Cass, and here for the ride are my co-hosts and co-founders, Reese and Ryan.
We started this podcast off the back of our business, Sport Design Australia, with the purpose of exploring the intersection of the sporting and creative industries. We wanted to bring you the biggest names in sports design and content excellence.
Our guests this season are providing us with perspectives from all across the world, giving us insight into the artistry behind content and how it influences every aspect of the game. Whether you are a sports enthusiast, a designer, or a creator, Art of the Game will have something for you. Hey everyone, in today's episode, we are so excited to introduce you all to someone who is paving the way in the sports creative industry in the USA, Matt Desmond. Matt is a videographer who has worked with some of the US's biggest sporting organisations and teams across the MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, the list just goes on. We have Matt on the podcast today because here at Sport Design Australia, we have made it a mission not to only service sporting organisations, but also to build, develop and support creatives. Through this, we have found Matt, who has taken the idea of a creative network to a whole new level. That, along with his experience as a creative for these major sporting leagues, it is a no-brainer for us to have Matt on the podcast today. So let's welcome Matt to Art of the Game, and he can give us a bit more of an insight into himself. So hello, Matt. Welcome, Matt. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. It's always great to talk to creatives in different parts of the world, so I'm really excited to be on. But yeah, I can just go into a little bit of a background about myself just to kind of give the listeners an idea of who I am. So like Cass mentioned, my name's Matt Desmond. I am a sports video producer based in the US. I've worked in pretty much all the sports leagues that are offered in the US. Been in the industry for going on 13 years. 10 of those years were working on the team and the league side, anywhere from the college university level into the professional realms with the MLB, NFL, and now it's been the last 3 years I have my own production business, so now I get to work with each and every league. So it's been a really fascinating journey for me.
And we know, Matt, that you're from Pittsburgh, so you're all about the Pittsburgh teams. Can you give us a rundown on your, fan experience with sport and how that kind of came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. For people outside of the U.S. that might not know, Pittsburgh's a very big sports town. So you kind of grow up with sports, in your life. So, growing up, I was a big sports fan, rooting for the Steelers, the Pirates, and then also in the college realms, the University of Pittsburgh. So whenever there was an opportunity to, work in the sports industry as a profession, it was a no-brainer. Just kind of find my niche and my way going into the industry. So it's been a great way to connect sports and do it for a living.
Yeah, nice. And how early on in your being a fan of sports did you work out that you wanted to mix business and sport?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up, being an athlete, and I knew that, my skills probably weren't going to get me to a professional level. So I thought real quick that maybe I should think about other outlets to be, working in the industry. So I actually, fell in love with it when I was in high school. Not a lot of people really find their direction of what they want to do that early. But I actually started out thinking I wanted to be on air and, be the next sports anchor. But when I went into my sophomore year of college, I really fell in love with the storytelling components of it. So I quickly navigated to really telling the stories behind the scenes, and it's kind of evolved since then. So I really found my niche in college and was really able to explore different areas when I got into the industry. So it's been very rewarding so far. So I'm just excited about, everything I've got to experience at this point.
Yeah, nice. Before we get into the business side of things, what sport were you an athlete in?
Yeah, so I played soccer. I was recruited to play in college. Glad I didn't play because, it just takes up a lot of your life. So I was able to focus on what I wanted to do, found out that, being on air wasn't the thing I wanted to do. So, I was able to really test something out, see if I liked it, and found out I didn't. So I was able to find out, my true passion. But I also play volleyball, just like to be active and, just play sports with friends. So still play volleyball to this day. Soccer just kind of takes a little bit of a backhand right now.
Lovely.
Yeah, nice.
So we know that you mentioned that you started off, working for these teams and organisations, and now you've moved into a bit more of a freelance capacity. We work with a lot of freelancers over here in Australia, but I don't feel like that the teams or leagues have adopted the working with freelance model as much as they have within the US. So can you give us a bit of a download into your experience of working as a freelancer as opposed to working as a full-time employee, and how that's kind of being adopted by the sports within the US, or what you've noticed a bit more than probably what we've got here in Australia at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first 10 years of my career, I was working in a full-time capacity, either on the team side or working in a league office. It really wasn't until COVID happened, the pandemic, that you really started to see freelance start to rise and be more of a permanent position where people could, step into that role and really have, some job security. Because when COVID happened, it forced a lot of companies and teams and leagues to think in a different, perspective. Like, how can we get content, provided to us if we're not allowed to be in the office? So it really allowed that work from home model. So I've been doing it for the last 3 years. It's a blessing that, we have the technology that allows us to tap into different, teams and leagues, not even just in the US, but worldwide. So it's cool because for freelance, you're juggling a lot of clients, but when you're working in a team setting, you're juggling a lot of responsibilities. So when I work with different clients, I just kind of see that as different projects, and each have deadlines. So it's a very deadline oriented industry. So you just really got to be strategic on who you take on, and you got to be comfortable saying no to projects, because at the end of the day, your reputation's on the line, and you want to make sure that you're delivering a quality product. So you don't want to overload your plate. You want to make sure that you're going to be able to hand off a deliverable, and it's going to be able to really represent your standard of work. So it's really a balancing act in freelance. You just got to be careful how much you take on, and you just got to be able to say no to projects sometimes, even though there might be some really cool opportunities out there. You just got to make sure that you're able to do everything that you take on.
That's some really good advice for freelancers out there. I think the ability to say no to some things, making sure that you're able to keep that high quality over going for more quantity. What about some advice for brands who are engaging with freelancers? Do you have any advice for brands, how they could better engage with freelancers and work with freelancers better?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the biggest thing is when brands, engage with freelancers, is there's a little bit of hesitancy because it's a new person that you're working with. A lot of the times when I work with a new client, I provide them with my portfolio. We go over briefs of what the projects are going to look like before we move forward in the next part of the conversation. But, when you're working with a freelancer, they have a wealth of knowledge, working in that niche of the industry. So a lot of trust, has to be taken into consideration. But also, when a brand is working with a freelancer for the first time, it's typically, a bandwidth issue on the brand side. So it's really a great way to introduce new talent into that brand's ecosystem. So whenever they have, a last minute project, they now have a solution in store that they can turn to and really grow their brand in different ways. And I think it's really refreshing when freelancers come onto new projects, because they're able to offer, a new style or a new perspective that maybe the in-house team didn't think of. So it's just a great way to really think differently when you're hiring outside. So I always, encourage brands just to even have conversations with freelancers, just to kind of learn just the process and just get educated about it, because it is a little bit new. So as long as they have more information about it, I definitely encourage them to look more into it.
What about on the team side, do you think? Do you think that from your experience of working on both sides of the spectrum, do you think that was a reluctance to use freelancers prior to COVID, and do you think that was kind of the linchpin on what made them change into working with this like kind of hybrid model, or were they adopting freelancers in a bit more of a larger capacity prior to COVID, or was there a bit of a reluctance there? I think we see a bit of reluctance here for brands to kind of think they're really fighting for internal resource, which we think is great. We want teams to be, highly resourced internally, but there are barriers to having internal resources from a creative point of view, not even mentioning any of the kind of, HR type, costs and overheads that they encounter. But there's more, skill set shortages in creative. You've not everyone has the same skill set. Not everyone has a wide breadth of skill set. So sometimes you're going to be wanting to go to someone for an illustration or, broadcast videography or, social videography, those kinds of things, different person to person. So hiring someone internally could potentially be a barrier for that. You might only get someone in one of those skill sets and not be able to cover the broad breadth of what content and creative offers. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get across is, was there a reluctance to use freelancers prior to COVID? And if so, how has that changed? Or if not, why do you think that the US sports are adopting the freelance model a whole lot more than potentially other markets?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think prior to COVID, it was less frequent and it was more of a project by project basis. Um, Not that there was a hesitancy to hire freelance. Before COVID happened, freelance was mostly a game day role that was being filled. So if you had a replay operator or a technical director, those are freelance type positions that were very common. After COVID happened, there's a lot of turnover in sports in the sports industry as a creative in the U.S. market, at least. I don't know if that's the same outside of the U.S., but really, there was a point, in the sports creative industry where there's so much turnover, where there was not enough continuity with these teams hiring creatives, where they really needed to lean on more experienced people. So, reaching out to the freelance network and having those people, on hand and say, hey, we do have a project that really hones in on your skill sets and we think you would really do well with it, is becoming more of the norm these days. So I think the freelancers, they have, a wide arsenal of tools and skill sets to offer. So whenever projects do come in from a client, they're able to really help them out in multiple, facets. And it's interesting because, a creative, when I started out, we're tasked with being like a Swiss Army knife. They wanted a videographer, they wanted an editor, they wanted a motion designer, they wanted a graphic designer. So like, a lot of people who started out in this industry have a little bit of everything on their plates in terms of things they can do. But, as you're in this industry a little bit longer, you kind of have more of your specializations. But with freelance now, it's really just helping the teams out because there's so much demand for content these days. So they really want to make sure that they have the right people in the right places to help them out. So I really don't think there's a big stigma on hiring a freelancer. I don't think that's a bad connotation at all. I think the freelancer, word is becoming more common in the U.S. market, and I think there's a lot of great trade back between a freelancer and the brand that's using them.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and you made a point there around the thirst or the want for more and more content. One thing that we kind of continuously have conversations here with in Oz is how do you value that content, or what's the ROI on that content? How teams and leagues who might be budget or resource strapped, how are they justifying the creation of this content? What's some of the conversation in the US in the teams or the leagues around content and the ROI of that content?
Yeah, so I mean, there's analytics for each platform. It just depends on the platform that you're creating for. Short form content has really skyrocketed. Those 5 to 10 seconds or even 5 to 15 second spots, really something that's short and digestible for the audience and the fan base to really consume themselves with. Each year, everyone's attention span is dwindling. So you want to make sure that you're really grasping their attention the quickest way possible. You don't want to ram something down someone's throat that they don't want to watch, but you want to be able to really engage your audience the right way. And I think what's unique is, each sport has different sectors of their fan base. So like a fan base, for example, like if we looked at the Kansas City Chiefs, like they just won the Super Bowl this past year, but they also had a really interesting storyline where, Travis Kelce was dating Taylor Swift. That's a whole different,
Oh,
fan base
I
that's
didn't hear
coming into
about
the
that one.
picture.
That's a new one. Yeah.
Yeah, breaking news.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like that's another part of the fan base that you typically don't have. You're introducing a new audience into the picture. So I think you have to be accommodating to whoever's watching your games and really be a little bit more free spirited on the type of content you're creating because the fan bases for each team and each league are growing each day. So you want to make sure that you're creating content that's going to multiple audiences and not just your diehard sports fan.
Do you think that the teams are focused a lot more on like ROI as a particular number, or are they kind of just in this world where, there's so much content, they want to be known for being, the best in the content landscape, and they want to, do really great things and be, showcased across the world and be part of, these conversations in the creative and content space. So, is there a huge focus on what the actual number is, or is there a bit more of just like an understanding that content has this just organic way of inviting fans into trusting them, or tapping into different fan bases, or just being relevant in conversations? And is that for some of these teams good enough in terms of what ROI typically would look like, or are they still really focused on analytics and that number and how they justify like X amount of investment equals X amount of eyeballs? So what is the conversation that you're seeing at your level when these things are being created? Is it very much more around, let's just get this out there, let's just be a brand that people talk about and know, or let's be a brand that makes money from content?
Yeah, so you can answer that in two ways. So, there is a lot of trial and error when it goes into content, creation. When you have your strategy meetings with your teams, you're going to take chances, and sometimes things will work, and sometimes things won't work. But you really are going to use analytics for every kind of case that you're going to be creating content for. But in one sphere, you're going to be working with sponsorships and partnerships teams, and you're going to have another sponsor tied to that content series. So the pressure for the ROI to really come into play is a little bit more significant if if you're creating content and there's no sponsorship or partnership. You're able to take a little bit more chances, and not to say that content won't thrive, but you have a little bit more of wiggle room to take more chances and see if that really pays off. So I think a lot of the time in the ideation phases, you're seeing what's trending, what's really gravitating the fans to really feed into your brand. And you kind of take it from there. I mean, each month you're going to get an analytics report. You could do, weekly, bi-monthly, whatever it might be, but you kind of got to keep a pulse on what's working and what's not working and be able to adapt and do it, pretty frequently, because you don't want to just keep churning out content. And if it's not being acknowledged by your fan base, you don't want to keep doing something that's not being received well. So you got to be adaptable and do it without taking it personally too. You just got to be able to try something. If it worked, great. If it didn't, you got to move on to the next thing.
It's such a good advice there about not taking things personally. Like, creative is just it's just so subjective, and sometimes you can fall in love with an idea and your fans absolutely hate it. It's sometimes hits the ego, but I think it's some really good advice. Just quickly before we move on to chatting about the sports creative community, I just wanted to touch on a point that you made around sponsored content and having a sponsor on. We, again, I think we're quite amateur, or not amateur, maybe a little bit more less advanced over here in Australia in terms of like bringing a brand on board for sponsored social content. In your experience, have you found it works best utilising existing formats, so content that the teams are already producing or the leagues are already producing, and bringing a brand into that? Or is it better to create a new format or a new piece of content that brings the brand in?
Yeah, I think you can do either or. It really just depends on the comfortability of the sponsor that you're working with. So whenever you're creating content that is sponsored, the one phrase we use in creative is sometimes when you're working with multiple people in the room, there's too many cooks in the kitchen. Well, for, working with sponsorship, you're adding another group of cooks in the kitchen. So you really got to make sure that, any chances that you're taking are going to be thought out, and they're going to be strategic on, how you're going to be able to convey the storytelling at the end of the day and really elevate the brand while you're doing that. So typically, what happens is, if we're going to be doing a content series, it might be something that you tried last year or the season before and you had great success with, and you're able to bring a sponsor on board that following season because you had a great return on investment. So you want to tie a sponsor to that, not just to help the sponsor out, but you really want to, evolve that content series to the next level. So it makes sense to tie a sponsor to it. But if you want to try something new, you got to run it by the sponsor because, they are putting those dollars towards that series. So you got to just make sure that the communication is open and you're willing to take chances, but also they got to be reasonable chances as well because you have a sponsor tied to it. So the biggest thing is just communication and really showcasing the vision for what you're trying to achieve and making sure that the client is on board. And if they have any changes, you got to be, willing to adapt along the way. So it's just got to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
I just have one more question before we jump into what you're doing with the sports creative community. But you're obviously working with some pretty huge organizations and brands, and then, people would only dream of working with one of these teams or leagues, and you get to work with kind of all of them, or you've at least touched all of them throughout your career so far, which is really amazing. What does a day look like? What does a typical day or a week look like? What type of projects are you working on? What is the breadth of the briefs that you're getting? And how, as a humble creative, do you kind of stay pretty humble and realize that, wow, like you're getting to live out the dreams of many young creatives, but you're also making a business of it. So you've just got to kind of like dig in and get the work done. So yeah, what does life look like for you really on a day or weekly basis? I know that's really hard to answer as a creative, but just, give us a guide on the spectrum of things that you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing I want to emphasize is it's a journey to be where you are today, and really got to embrace what you did to get in the position that you are. So I've been able to work with a lot of leagues and teams across the U.S. markets, and that just didn't happen overnight. It was a lot of relationships that I built over time that allowed me to work in those spaces. So I've been very blessed to be in this position now that I'm in the position to have my own business and operate in a freelance capacity. But each week is different, and that's what makes the freelance lifestyle, enlightening to me, and really motivates me to put my best forward because I'm able to work with different creative teams and different sports throughout the calendar year. So it really just depends on the week. But one week I could be creating a hype video for a playoff game, or a big game that's happening that week. Or another week I could be telling a feature story on an athlete or a coach. It really just depends what the client wants. I really like to take on new projects just to challenge myself, to stay fresh, and even just learn new sports because as you work in this industry, sometimes it can become a little bit repetitive, and I want to make sure that each year I'm trying new things and growing and seeing what I like, because I think what's really cool about being a creative is you're always learning, and you always have that initiative to try new things and learn. So for me, it's just it's an ever evolving career, and next year I hope to try a new sport or try a new client that I haven't worked with before, because there's so much out there to work with. Just want to make sure that I get to experience a little bit of everything.
So many more questions, but anyway, we'll shift gears quickly. As I love for you to give our listeners an overview on what you're doing with the sports creative community. This is how we kind of connected in terms of what you're doing over there and what we're trying to do here with Sports Design Australia. So as well as being a busy kind of videographer and running your own business there, give us a bit of an overview on what sports creative community is and how it came to be and where you're at with it now.
Yeah, absolutely. So sports creative community sprouted about 6 years ago. And it came out of a void in the networking circles and professional career development opportunities as a sports creative. So the sports creative community is a nonprofit for sports creatives. We have over 8,000 members worldwide, and we're housed on Slack. It's a communication hub which allows creatives to find new jobs, use it as a resource if there's any questions they might be stuck on or looking for advice. It's a great way to showcase your work. So it's really a tight knit community. At least in the U.S., if you work in sports, it might seem very big from the outside, but it's really a small industry. A lot of people know people, so it's funny. When I first started in this industry, it just kind of came as an idea, like, hey, like we need to really help each other because creatives support creatives. Like that's one of my biggest sayings, and I really wanted to make a community where we're pushing the industry forward. So creating the sports creative community was really just create opportunities for others and really ways to advance the industry as a whole. So that's what kind of led me to creating the sports creative community. And yeah, we're thriving, each and every day, creating new opportunities. We do events across the country in the U.S. and hopefully one day we'll make it overseas.
Yeah, I love that. Creatives supporting creatives. It's such a good little one-liner, and it's probably something that we've seen a lot over the last kind of 24 months here in Oz is these young freelancers and kind of working together and supporting each other really quite publicly, which is great to see. And it's less of that kind of competitive nature, and it's more of how can we kind of help build each other up. What are some of the people that you have within the community? Are they working kind of across brands, across sporting teams, across leagues? Give us a bit of a flavour of what they look like.
Yeah, so that's a fascinating thing about our community. If you look at the word creative, sometimes people will ask, well, what is a creative? And that's, what's really cool is there's so many different job titles that fall underneath the word creative. So, anywhere from videographers to social media managers to photographers, graphic design to motion designers, copywriters, marketing managers, game presentation, like the whole gamut. So it's a wide variety of people in the community, and it ranges from the team side, the league side, agencies, the networks, the conferences. So really, there's a place for everyone in the community, and it's not just for people that are already in the industry. It's for people who are entering the industry as well, who might be lost or looking for a sense of direction. So we have a lot of students who are in the community looking for their first opportunity or their first internship just to get their feet wet. So, when I started in this industry, I had a great mentor, and I want to be able to provide, advice to really lead people in the right direction to make sure that they're having a positive experience in this industry. So we want to make, a resource for them. So that was another reason the sports creative community came about, because we want to make sure that we have all the resources for people who might not have those resources within their employer or within their own circles. So it's kind of multifaceted and ways that we can help out the industry.
Yeah, I love how before you mentioned as well, like, sport, it seems like a huge industry, but we know that it's a very small community. And so you mentioned that previously, and I think that's what is the best thing about the industry, that there's so much you can do, but like there is a very small, tight-knit community that are able to help you get to where you want to get to within the industry. I think it'd be good to understand from you what is the sport creative community doing for each other. So are they focused more on giving each other opportunities or talking about inspiration, being mentors, or are there, is it offering recruitment opportunities? Are brands able to jump in and access this community? How are you activating the community, or how are they activating themselves?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways we're doing that. I'll kind of keep it consolidated to a couple things we're doing. So we do networking events across the U.S. right now, where we have physical events where it's a social networking evening. So it'll be about a 4-hour event. We'll have brands, sponsors come to the events. They're able to interact with the creatives, show what's emerging in the industry. But it's also an opportunity for us to have panels to educate the attendees. But it's in another sense, at that event, we'll have networking opportunities for people, in that city. So, for example, we had an event in LA last year, and I think there was over 80 different brands at that event. So it's just great for people within that city just to network with people. But outside of our events, we do have, mentor and mentee opportunities within the community. Our job channel, is great because, what's fascinating about that is we have the hiring manager inside the community posting that job. So if you're to reach out to that person, you're not just going through that person to speak through another person. You're talking to the hiring manager directly, which is very uncommon in any industry. So we really like to connect them with the right people. So that's something that's unique. And what I think is the best part of the sports creative community is we don't charge membership for anyone to join. So if you're fresh out of college and you don't have as much money as other people, in the community that might be further along, we don't really want to create a paywall or gatekeep anyone. We want to be able to help anyone from any walk of life. So we're really open to forwarding the community in any way we can and putting them first.
Yeah, that's great. And sometimes you see with these communities, and you hope it doesn't happen, but there are often people who join the communities that might be somewhat negative towards the community or aren't bringing the right spirit to the community. Is it? Do you go through like a thorough vetting process for people to kind of enter? Do you have to be referred? What's that process look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain guidelines. When we have a member and a vendor joined, there's different parameters that they must cooperate with. We really want this community to be very organic and in nature. We don't want it to be very salesy. There is room for vendors to be there, but they're supposed to be there in a resource capacity. And in any nonprofit, there are community guidelines. So if someone would, act out of line, that's not welcome in our community. We want to make sure that we're maintaining a healthy relationship, in all conversations that we have. And one of our biggest pillars in the community is diversity, equality, and inclusion. So we want to be diverse and inclusive to anyone in the industry. So we really want to showcase all creatives and make sure that we're pushing forward, a brighter future, and one where we're seeing, more minorities and different roles throughout the industry. So we do a good job of spotlighting everyone in the community.
Oh, we love that.
Yeah, so cool. We're obviously trying to do that on a much smaller local level here with some of our freelancers and network and our network as well. Do you have, so you say you've got 8,000 people within the network. They're obviously primarily based in the US, but do you have touch points around the global network as well? And if so, how are you expanding that into other networks and other regions?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's primarily based in the US, but doesn't mean that we're not in other countries. We're in the UK. We do have some members in Australia, Mexico, Canada. But the biggest thing with us is we want to make sure that we're pushing forward in a positive way, and we're reaching different demographics. So when it first started, a lot of teams will go to internationally to play games. Like, for example, the NFL does the London games every year, and now they're expanding into Germany, Mexico, Brazil. And whenever these creatives travel, sometimes it's hard to make connections in different countries. So we want to really use this as a resource whenever people are traveling internationally, that there is a communication between the country that they're visiting and vice versa. Say if someone from Australia were to visit the US, we want to make sure that we have a pipeline, so when someone comes over here, we're able to help you out, and vice versa. So really want to make it sports creative community a international community, because that's what sports is. Sports is international, and everyone watches it, and creatives is really transferable in that way. It's a global industry, so we want to make sure that we're a home to everyone.
Such a beautiful language,
Yeah.
sport. That's why we love it. What's next for sports creative community?
Yeah, I would say the next 2 to 3 years, we hope to be international. That's one of the things that I really aspire to do, because, like I said, sports is global. I met a gentleman at our New York event who flew in from Italy to be there. And I was like really just taken away by that. That was amazing. And I understand the need for these types of events, internationally. So hopefully in the next couple of years, we can make that a reality. But really, it's just continuing to put the creatives at the forefront, and want to make sure that's we're just that listening ear, and really gauging where the industry is going, because this industry changes very frequently, and we want to make sure that any resources that we're providing, we're doing it to the best of our ability. So it's really just listening and being responsive in the correct way. So we want to take time to figure out how we can be a problem solver and offer solutions, and really just connect people with the correct people.
Love that. Well, when you want to do sports creative community in Australia, you know who to talk to. We can definitely help you get that set up. Let's just move on a little bit now. I know we haven't got too much time left, but I just wanted to chat to you around how you're seeing the activation of athletes across the US network. Obviously, athletes over there are like superheroes. They're like gods. They definitely have a higher profile probably than most of the ones that we have. Our network sport superstars and profiles are obviously a little bit less down here given the market that we're in. But you look to the US and you've got players who are, I guess, mini brands in their own right, outweighing engagement and investment than the teams and leagues themselves. How are you seeing that play out in the content space? Are you getting briefs from teams and leagues around activating these athletes, or are they coming to you directly, or how is that kind of shift happening over there in the content space?
Yeah, so I mean, player-driven content is definitely on the rise, and now in the U.S. markets, there are departments that are dedicated to player marketing, and it's really adhering to players having their own brand, and tapping into that and introducing more of their personality to the fans. Everyone kind of knows who they are as an athlete, but it's kind of going behind the scenes and seeing who they are as a human being. And I think that's a really fascinating way to display it. So it's more of that organic content, that first person perspective, the days in our lives, tapping into that. But it's also how we work with the agencies that these athletes are signed to. So I think that there's a lot of correlations between agencies and teams having closer relationships. And if not, there's using college athletics as an example, there are collectives being formed, and it's really tapping into having opportunities for the athletes to create content for themselves. I'm not sure if this is familiar to Australia, but in the college athletics space, the NIL launched, a year or two ago, and that stands for name, image, and likeness. So there is money being filtered into the universities for the athletes now. So I think it's really starting to be a trend where the collectives are building up the personal brand of these collegiate athletes. So whenever they go to a major league sport, they're prepared to have that personal brand in their wings, so that they're not really foreign to it. So I think it's a great way to kind of segue once you graduate from the university sport playing level and go to the pros. You can already have that mentality there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that was like ahead of the Super Bowl earlier this year. There was a few comparisons of college football players. I think like Archie Manning was in there, who's a backup quarterback, and he's making more money per year than Brock Purdy, who's playing for the 49ers in the Super Bowl. I think it's been quite an incredible shift over the last couple of years. Are there any athletes who are kind of like pushing the boundaries of that content creation and really going, I need to create my own personal brand?
Ones that stick out to me right now, I don't want to have one on top of my head in at least the college realms, but you have Patrick Mahomes. He's a pretty polarizing figure, but also just in an athlete-driven content, we've seen it in the podcast area. Jason Kelsey and Travis Kelsey have a podcast, and I think you're going to see a lot more athletes really tap into the podcast space, because everyone really wants to hear their stories, and you don't have the opportunity to hear their stories. So when Travis and Jason, hopped on a podcast and really just kept it real, I think, the fans really appreciated that. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that player interaction, teaming up with each other to have those opportunities where they're able to really share those organic stories with their fans.
Yeah, I think the what the Kelsey boys have done with New Heights is truly incredible. I'm hearing reports that they're talking about $100 million media deal, which is it's insane when you think about just two blokes from Cincinnati talking absolute rubbish, but being really real about it.
I mean, I don't know anything about NFL other than the Super Bowl and Taylor Swift, but I've also listened to this podcast, so that shows that it's definitely breaking new audiences and new territories that the Chiefs and NFL probably wouldn't be able to do on their own without that kind of pop culture reference. I don't know, there's probably no real answer to this question. It's probably something that we would need to discuss with brands and teams on a more deeper level. But, it's interesting to know that there's a shift towards athlete and player-driven content. But as a brand, it could be a risky strategy in investing so much heavily in a player or in your athletes when there is this potential that they could leave your brand. So yes, whilst they're there and whilst you're investing in them, it does kind of go hand in hand, athlete and team. But what happens when they leave? What happens? Do you have to have diversification in your strategy around making sure that the brand is first and foremost, or is it just making sure that you've got depth in your roster and depth in your athlete strategy that having your player leave doesn't actually affect that brand? Or it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both, Cass. It's having a depth in your roster, but it's also having those conversations when the athlete signs a contract. Say if you do leave our brand, this is the game plan. So I think there's contingency plans in place if an athlete were to leave. But I think that's always something that kind of comes up. But it's a risk and take that you get when you work with an athlete on an individual basis.
Yeah, you're most likely to just take the engagement now and just see what happens, and then obviously just have backup strategies and game plans for stuff if they do move on. It's funny to think about it in that business context that they are virtually an employer of your brand, and they do have outside of contractual obligations the chance to leave and move on, and they might eventually take that IP that you've built up for them and benefit another brand, which we've definitely seen that happen across the sporting landscape before. So it's interesting chat.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's so many good recent examples like Lionel Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, the amount that they're paid to kind of transfer clubs, and then you see how much revenue those teams make from merchandise on that first day when they release their jerseys. It's like, it doubles what they transfer fees. So you can see that the growing importance of those individual player brands and how much fans are attracted to those brands as well.
Yeah, but that to come off the result of an investment of an opposing of their old brand investing in them. So it's kind of it's amazing for the athlete and amazing for the team they go to. But I wonder if that potentially is what plays into some of the teams at a local level's mind when they're investing solely in an athlete as well, particularly around behavioural issues and player misconduct and things like that. It is a risky strategy, but it definitely has a payoff and has a reward for sure. Maybe it's just more in recruiting these players that have already been invested in and have a high media profile and capitalising off that. But it's definitely a trend. There's definitely a whole lot more happening in the athlete space here. We've just seen the release of Out of the Parramatta documentary with Sean Lane and things that focusing really heavily on player-driven stories, and they're going really well. So it's only gonna grow. Talking about future of design and creative, I guess let's just have a quick chat about that. What is coming out of the sports content world in the US? What's the new it thing? What's driving your content conversations and innovations? Is there anything that's kind of, a few years back it would be like everyone trying to invest in reels and social content and hype videos. Graphics wise, it's there was a big push around game promos and those kinds of things, illustrations, manipulate. There's so many different design types and content types at the moment. But what is it? Is it AI? Is it something different? Like what's happening over there that we should probably be earmarking?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an influx of emerging technologies led by AI, as you kind of mentioned there. It's that data-driven template builders that's really easing the workflow for creatives. So, we're seeing Mogurts be created, which is a kind of a a graphic package that's pluggable into like a Adobe Premiere Pro. You have Midjourney, which is a AI kind of design tool. If you kind of can speak a design idea into existence, you can take it to Midjourney and kind of turn it around with little to no design background. And then, a couple of, really cool things that have happened of late. If you watch Super Bowl, you were able to see an alternate broadcast, one that was led, for, kids, which is really cool. So, they had a Nickelodeon themed, like cartoon style broadcast presentation. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that, honestly. So like even a couple years down the road, I could see it being a pop culture, alternate broadcast, like for the Taylor Swift fans out there. Like we make it a music centric broadcast where they can relate to the things that are going on. But outside of that, the NBA All-Star Game unveiled something really cool that happened a couple months ago, where there was an LED court. So it was an interactive, you know, interactive piece on the court. So when you have game presentation, you have sponsorship deals like I'm not sure which was the sponsor for the All-Star game, but they were able to have a very interactive display of what was going on, and was able to connect the audience with what was going on the court. So I think you could see a lot more displays of that throughout different sports venues. But each year there's something different, and it's really how can we do it but a little bit more. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of this year and how we're able to expand on it next year.
Yeah, the NBA court, that was unreal. Very NBA Jam vibes of my of the early '90s, which was very nostalgic.
I saw that play out on like this. I think I was watching the slam dunk competition or something that happened. I just happened to turn it on whilst at home, and I was like, "What is happening on this court?" And it was amazing how they were able to kind of take real time stuff that was happening on the court as well, and it was probably pre-programmed, to be honest, but it felt real time and played out on the court as well. From a visual experience on the broadcast, it definitely added to what was going on in stadium. And I think half the time it's hard to replicate what's going on in stadium from an engagement and fan vibe, but that definitely took it to a whole new level. So yeah. What
about we always have these conversations just amongst ourselves, but like where, from a channel perspective, where are brands like sporting teams, leagues, where are they focusing on in the US? Are they putting more focus into YouTube or into TikTok? There's obviously a lot of conversation, well, we're getting a lot of conversation in our market about TikTok and whether it gets shut down in the US. Are there other channels that are being more focused on? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's the big gravitation towards TikTok, but just with the uncertainty right now, it's not like we're pivoting just yet. We have contingency plans, if that were to go down. But before TikTok, got off the ground, Instagram has been a great way for brands to connect with their fan bases. Twitter, X, that's been a great way for brands to connect with their fan bases too. So those are pretty much the two leaders. YouTube is more for that long form content, the more historical content that a lot of brands do. So I think each medium has a different purpose. So it's really what segment of your fan base is going to each of those platforms. So I think each platform is important in a different sense, but I think if you're really trying to get the emerging fans, your number one focused part of your fan base, it's probably going to be Twitter, X, Instagram. So I think those are kind of the primary ones that kind of stand above the rest.
It's funny because when we were 3 or 4 years ago working in rugby league space, most of our investment was going into Facebook. Particularly as a channel, and I don't feel like we see the briefs coming through for Facebook content per se anymore. It's either like an Instagram or a TikTok or a YouTube brief, which then or Twitter X brief. But I guess that content would be rolling out on Facebook. But it's funny that is not the primary the primary brief anymore, and
Yeah.
it's more just like we should probably put it there because we spent a fair bit of time building an audience there, but they're probably not fostering that audience anymore. And that audience, I mean, particularly from my own personal view, I don't go there for sporting content anymore.
No,
I don't
not.
seek out any information around sports or many entertainment properties on Facebook anymore. So it's funny that that's changed so quickly, and I think TikTok's definitely driven that because it made Instagram step up its game, and the changes at Twitter and stuff as well. But it's just crazy how that in a few years has just been like one of the channels that dominated, and now just doesn't seem to be resonating with fans in that arena anymore. Would you say that's the same over there? Facebook's kind of become just like an ancillary
Yeah, I mean, it was
database?
definitely something that was used maybe 7 to 10 years ago, but it's definitely been phased out. It's definitely not the primary focus these days.
Yeah. All right, so we don't have much time left. We might just finish on a few, more top level type chats. So what's your advice for young creatives trying to get into the industry? Obviously, you've got the pathway in through sports creative community. So you'd be seeing a lot of these young up and coming designers and creators trying to make it in the market. Sport is a passion of pretty much everyone across the world, or at least 80-90% of them. So you'd think as a designer or a creator, that's probably going to be your first point of call trying to get into sport. But we see sport being a passion of a lot of people, but being able to turn that into a career is actually quite difficult. There's only a certain amount of jobs within sport. There's only a certain amount of people that can work in sport, but also tying your passion to your business doesn't always work out. It'd be really great to understand from you how you got to the point that you're at, and so then therefore what's your advice to people who are trying to do the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, first off, you got to practice your craft. You got to continue to, do projects. You're going to fail sometimes, and that's fine. You got to learn from your mistakes and, move forward in a positive perspective, because a lot of times, sometimes if you fail, you might not have the confidence to take the next project on. So you just got to have an open mind and be positive throughout the whole process. But while you're working on your craft, you have to network. Networking is definitely the most important piece of being a creative, because you might get one job and you might be working with them full time, and then you might be laid off the next year. So you got to make sure that your network is the most valuable thing that you're doing with your career, because you never know who you're going to work with, and they can help you out down the road or vice versa. So networking right out of the gate should be a big priority. And also just your mannerism when you're interacting with other people. People are going to remember, just your interactions that you have with them. So be, kind, polite, understanding, and be patient, because, working in sports, a lot of professionals are very busy working in this industry. So you just have to go into it with a very positive approach, but you have to be very intentional about how you're reaching out to people. So a lot of people's times are very valuable. So make sure when you have those conversations that, you have your list of questions ready to go, and, have follow-ups. I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation with a young person trying to get into the industry, and they think just having one call is going to solve all of their issues. It's not. It's just the step into the door. You got to be intentional about how you're going to follow up, because you got to be persistent on how you're going to grow the relationship. So I think that's a huge thing, is just network, but do it in an intentional manner.
Yeah, it's such great advice, and I think one of the things that we found in working in the creative community, especially in sport, is don't burn your bridges. We've spoken about it a couple of times already. The community is so small, and one negative move or treat someone poorly, and a lot of the community will kind of know that you're that person. And it's your advice is really interesting. It's kind of like balancing the offering value and coming into a community. It's quite hard to offer value, but also doing it in a persistent manner as well. So it's quite a unique balance that creatives and people wanting to work in sport need to take.
Definitely. So Matt, what's next for you? Where you've obviously pretty much ticked off all major sporting leagues in the US. Is there Is there a aspiration for you to work with anyone that you haven't worked with previously, or are you wanting to hit the international market? What's kind of, or are you just, deep in finals and playoff planning that you don't have time to even sleep or breathe or think?
Yeah, honestly, when you operate your own business, first when you start off, you want to take on every client, and right now it's really balancing that work-life balance. And right now I have a pretty good client list, and it's really balancing the personal things being creative, and that doesn't really get talked about when you work in sports. Sometimes work is your life, and that's not what I want my business to be. I want to have a healthy relationship outside of sports. So really for me, it's how do I take time off and not have to stress about okay, if I'm going to take off a couple weeks, am I going to have a gig when I get back? So it's really just balancing out, the life component of being a small business owner, and being okay if you're going to miss a client or two. So I think it's really just growing in a sense of not having to take on every job, and realizing taking care of yourself is just as important.
Yeah, I'm glad you'd mentioned that. I think like the combination of one, working in sport, and then two, running your own business, it could lead to you kind of getting stuck in a bit of a hole of just cycling through work constantly. Mm-hmm. What are some of the strategies that you use yourself to be able to kind of switch off and separate your own life from the 24/7 sporting world?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I first started in the sports industry, it was a grind. Like, you were expected to work 6 to 7 days a week. Now I really have a strict policy that I don't work weekends. I take that time to, enjoy the other things I enjoy in life. But also, I make sure that, I have a couple of vacations planned throughout the year, and that's just a non-negotiable. I'm going to take vacation. I need to recharge and rejuvenate, because if you're just going to be working 24/7, you're not doing anyone any favors. You're probably not going to be very happy, and you're really going to get burnt out that way. So, the longevity of being a creative is very important to put self-care at the forefront as well. So I think that's one of the biggest things that's not talked about when you start your own business, is forgetting to take care of yourself, because you're so focused on making sure that your company is excelling at an appropriate rate, but sometimes you forget about yourself as well. So it's definitely a tough balance, but as you grow into it, I think you realize the importance of it.
Yeah, I think we need to remind ourselves of that sometimes.
Absolutely.
Too.
But when you work in sport and you love sport, and then you watch sport, and then you take some time off and you go to sport,
yeah.
it's pretty hard to get away from sport. So that's some amazing advice. So Matt, we've absolutely loved having you on the podcast today. It's been such an enlightening chat. We've gotten so much out of it. You doing an absolutely incredible job over there. Thanks for giving us such an amazing insight into not only the creative industry, but how it's playing out across sport in the US. God, we have so many more questions, so we potentially have to get you back again, or figure out a way to get some of these questions answered. But just quickly before you go, for those wanting to be a part of what you're offering in terms of sports creative community, how do they find you? How do they get involved? And how do we help you grow your presence in Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to join the sports creative community, all you have to do is go to sportscreativeslack.com. That is the invitation to our Slack community, and that will get you in with over 8,000 people across the globe. So that's our main communication hub. We are on social media too. If you search Sports Creative Community on Instagram, you can find us there. SCC United on Twitter, X, that's where we're at. We're also on LinkedIn as well. So there's a lot of different platforms that we're on. So we want to make sure that, whatever, stage of your career, you can find us on whatever platform you use the best.
Yeah, awesome. Well, if you're a sports creative or you work in sport, I think you definitely need to go and check out those channels.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today, Matt. We'll be in touch again soon.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.